"Congratulations to Tyler," I said, forcing the words through a smile that felt like broken glass. "My name's Anthony. I'm 44 years old, and I'd just watched 5 years of my life get handed to a 23-year-old kid who'd been at Ravenspark Ventures exactly 3 months. Tyler grinned like he'd earned something. The conference room smelled like stale coffee and disappointment. Everyone clapped. I clapped too. My manager, Gerald Patterson, stood at the head of the table with his chest puffed out like a rooster. "Tyler's going to do great things as our new regional operations director," he said. The same position I'd been training for since 2019. The same position I'd been promised would be mine when old Henderson retired. I kept my hands folded, kept my face neutral. But something cold settled in my chest, right where hope used to live. Tyler was Gerald's nephew. Everyone knew it. Nobody talked about it. The kid had fresh business degree ink on his diploma and a confidence that came from never having to earn anything. He'd spent 3 months watching me handle vendor contracts, manage supply chain logistics, and troubleshoot equipment failures across 4 states. Now he was my boss. "Anthony's been invaluable in getting Tyler up to speed," Gerald added, like that made it better. Like 5 years of perfect performance reviews and 60-hour weeks were just elaborate job training for someone else's future. I nodded. "Happy to help," I said. The meeting ended. People filed out, offering Tyler handshakes and congratulations. I gathered my notepad and pen, moving slower than usual. My mind felt sharp and clear, like when you wake up in the middle of the night and suddenly understand something that's been bothering you for months. Gerald caught my arm as I reached the door. "Anthony, stick around a minute." We stood alone in the conference room. He loosened his tie and tried to look sympathetic. "I know this might come as a surprise," he said, "but Tyler brings fresh perspectives, new energy." "Sure," I said. "You understand, right? It's nothing personal." I looked at him for a long moment. Gerald was 52, soft around the middle, with thinning hair he combed over to hide the bald spots. He'd inherited his position when his father-in-law retired. The irony wasn't lost on me. "I understand perfectly," I said. He relaxed. "Good. I knew you'd be professional about this. That's why you're such a valuable team member." Valuable. Not valuable enough for the promotion I'd earned, but valuable enough to train his nephew and smile about it. I walked back to my desk and sat down. The office buzzed with normal activity. Phones ringing, keyboards clicking, people solving problems. I opened my laptop and stared at the screen for a full minute before I started typing. I'd started at Ravenspark Ventures in March of 2019, right after my divorce finalized. Needed a fresh start, and manufacturing logistics felt like something solid I could build on. The company handled industrial equipment distribution across the Southwest. Boring work that paid well and let me sleep at night. Gerald hired me himself, shook my hand, said they needed someone with my experience. I'd spent 12 years at my previous company before budget cuts eliminated my position. At 44, starting over wasn't easy, but Gerald made it sound like an opportunity. "We're growing fast," he'd said during my interview. "Lots of room for advancement for the right people." I became the right people. Worked weekends when shipments got delayed, stayed late when customers had emergencies, built relationships with suppliers from Phoenix to Houston. My performance reviews were spotless. Gerald always smiled, always promised bigger things were coming. "You're management material, Anthony," he'd say. "Just need to be patient." Patient. I was good at patient. My daughter Sophia visited every other weekend. She was 16 now, old enough to notice when her dad looked tired. Sometimes she'd find me at the kitchen table on Sunday mornings, laptop open, responding to work emails. "Dad, it's the weekend," she'd say. "Just catching up," I'd tell her. "Building something good here." She'd roll her eyes, but she understood. Her mom had remarried a lawyer who worked reasonable hours and coached Little League. I was the dad who worked too much but sent her birthday money on time and never missed a school play. The first crack appeared 6 months ago when Gerald mentioned his nephew might be joining the company. "Smart kid," he'd said. "Just graduated from University of Texas. Business degree." I'd nodded, thinking nothing of it. Companies hired recent graduates all the time. started them in entry-level positions, let them learn the business from the ground up. But Tyler didn't start at the ground. He started in the office next to Gerald's, with the title Operations Specialist and a salary I could only guess at. Gerald introduced him around like visiting royalty. "Tyler's going to observe our processes," Gerald announced. "Learn how we do things." Tyler observed by sitting in on my client calls, taking notes while I explained vendor negotiations, asking questions that showed he didn't understand the basics of what we did. But he was eager, I'd give him that. And polite. Said, "Yes, sir," and "thank you," like his mother raised him right. I trained him because that's what you do. You help the new guy. Even when the new guy's last name is Patterson and his uncle signs your paychecks. Even when you start to suspect where this is all heading. The moment I knew came 3 weeks ago, during a conversation I wasn't supposed to hear. I'd stayed late to finish quarterly reports. The office was empty except for the cleaning crew. I was heading to the break room for coffee when I heard voices from Gerald's office. His door was cracked open, and the hallway carried sound better than people realized. "The board's going to ask questions," Gerald was saying. "Tyler's only been here 2 months. Another voice, deeper, older. Probably James Mitchell from corporate. "You said Anthony was ready for promotion. Anthony's solid, but Tyler's family, and he's got the degree. The board likes degrees." "What about Anthony's experience?" Gerald laughed. It wasn't a mean laugh, but it wasn't kind either. "Anthony's a good worker, reliable, but he's not executive material. He'll keep doing what he's doing, make good money, and everything works out." I stood in that hallway for 30 seconds, listening to them plan my future. Tyler would get Henderson's position. I would train him, support him, and pretend to be grateful for the opportunity. "Anthony won't cause problems," Gerald continued. "He's got a daughter, alimony payments. He needs this job. He'll fall in line." That's when I walked away. Quietly, so they wouldn't hear my footsteps. I went back to my desk, saved my work, and left the building. Drove home in complete silence. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Gerald's words. He'll fall in line, like I was a horse being broken to saddle, like 5 years of loyalty and hard work had earned me the right to be grateful for scraps. I thought about Sophia, how proud she'd been when I told her about the possible promotion. "My dad's going to be a director," she'd told her friends. Now I'd have to explain why that wasn't happening. I thought about my ex-wife, how she'd always said I was too passive. "You let people walk over you, Anthony," she'd said during one of our last fights. "Stand up for yourself for once." Maybe she'd been right. The next morning I came to work with a different mindset. I watched Tyler more carefully, noticed how Gerald included him in executive meetings while keeping me focused on day-to-day operations. Saw how other managers started deferring to Tyler on decisions that should have been mine. 3 weeks later, sitting in that conference room, watching Tyler accept congratulations for a job he hadn't earned, I felt something break inside me. Not anger, not sadness, just clarity. Gerald thought I needed this job, thought I'd fall in line because I had bills to pay and a daughter to support. He was wrong about a lot of things. I opened my laptop and started typing my resignation letter. My hands were steady, my mind was clear. For once in my life, I knew exactly what I was going to do. I submitted my resignation letter at exactly 4:30 p.m. on Friday. Gerald had just returned from walking Tyler around the warehouse, showing him his domain. I knocked on his door, handed him the envelope, and said, "This is my 2 weeks' notice." Gerald's face went through several expressions: confusion, disbelief, then something that looked like panic. He tore open the envelope and read quickly, his eyes moving back and forth across the page. "Is this a joke?" he said. "No, sir." "You can't be serious. You're leaving because Tyler got the promotion?" I stayed quiet, let him fill the silence. Gerald stood up, pacing behind his desk. "Anthony, let's be reasonable here. You're upset, I get it. But walking away from 5 years of building your career? That's not smart. I've made my decision." What about your daughter? Your responsibilities? There it was. The leverage he thought he had. The reason I'd fall in line and keep quiet. I'll manage, I said. Gerald's tone shifted, got harder. You realize how this looks, right? Quitting because you didn't get promoted, it's unprofessional, childish. I nodded. I can see how you'd think that. I won't give you a good reference. You understand that? Walking out like this, leaving us hanging. No company's going to want someone who throws tantrums. Something cold settled in my stomach. 5 years of perfect performance, and now I was throwing a tantrum. 5 years of staying late and working weekends, and now I was unprofessional. That's your choice, I said. Gerald sat back down, tried a different approach. Look, Anthony, I like you, you're good at what you do, but Tyler brings something different to the table. Youth, fresh ideas, vision. Vision, I repeated. The board wants innovation, new thinking. Tyler represents the future of this company. And what do I represent? Gerald paused. Experience, stability. Those are valuable too. Valuable enough to train his replacement, but not valuable enough to promote. I understood the math. I appreciate the clarification, I said. Don't do this, Anthony. Take the weekend, think it over. Come back Monday and we'll pretend this conversation never happened. I looked at Gerald for a long moment. He genuinely believed I would back down, believed that threatening my reference and questioning my professionalism would make me fold. I'll finish out my 2 weeks, I said. Train Tyler on anything he needs to know. Gerald's face darkened. You'll train him? You think Tyler needs training from someone who quits when things don't go his way? He's going to need to understand the vendor contracts, the supply chain logistics, the emergency protocols. I kept my voice level. Unless you plan to figure all that out yourself? That hit home. Gerald knew he didn't understand the technical side of operations, neither did Tyler. They needed me, at least for 2 more weeks. Fine, Gerald said. 2 weeks. But don't expect any favors. Don't expect me to help you land somewhere else. You're burning bridges here, Anthony. I nodded and turned to leave. Anthony, Gerald called after me. You're making a mistake. A big one. I stopped at the door. Maybe. But it's my mistake to make. I walked back to my desk feeling lighter than I had in months. The office was mostly empty, people heading home for the weekend. Tyler was still at his desk, studying organizational charts like they contained the secrets of the universe. I sat down and opened my laptop, started documenting everything Tyler would need to know. Vendor contact information, emergency procedures, troubleshooting guides, not because Gerald asked me to, but because the people who depended on our supply chains deserved better than chaos. My phone buzzed. Text message from my daughter. Dad, can we get dinner tomorrow? I want to hear about your week. I smiled and typed back. Absolutely. I've got news to share. Good news for once. News about standing up for myself. About walking away from people who didn't value what I brought to the table. Gerald thought he was punishing me. Thought threatening my reference would make me grateful for the chance to stay. He had no idea what he'd just set in motion. Monday morning brought revelations. I arrived early, as usual, and found Tyler already at his desk looking overwhelmed. He had spreadsheets open on 3 monitors and was frantically taking notes from vendor emails. Morning, Tyler, I said. How's the transition going? He looked up, relief flooding his face. Anthony, thank God. I've been here since 6 trying to understand the Morrison Industries account. Their procurement manager is threatening to cancel our contract if we don't resolve some shipping issue by noon. Morrison Industries, our biggest client. They ordered heavy machinery components worth $2 million annually. I'd been managing their account personally for 4 years. What's the issue? I asked. Something about delayed titanium brackets from our supplier in Tucson. But I can't figure out which supplier, and their emails are confusing. I looked at Tyler's screen. He had Morrison's email open, but he was also looking at supplier contracts that had nothing to do with titanium brackets. He was drowning. Tyler, I said carefully, Did Gerald brief you on the Morrison account? He said you'd handle the transition, but then he mentioned your situation and I thought maybe I should figure it out myself. Show initiative. My situation, that's what they were calling it now. I spent the next 3 hours walking Tyler through the Morrison relationship, explained how their just-in-time delivery requirements worked, showed him the backup supplier network I'd built over 4 years, helped him understand why a simple shipping delay could cascade into a contract cancellation. This is incredibly complex, Tyler said as we finished resolving the crisis. How do you keep track of all these moving parts? Experience, I said, and good documentation. Could you show me your documentation system? That's when I realized something. Gerald hadn't just promoted Tyler without preparation, he'd promoted him without understanding what the job actually required. Tyler wasn't incompetent, but he was completely unprepared for the scope of regional operations. I spent my lunch break making phone calls, reached out to contacts I'd built over the years. Word travels fast in industrial logistics, and people were already hearing about changes at Ravenspark. Some were concerned about continuity, others were curious about new opportunities. Anthony, said Janet Morrison, the procurement manager who'd threatened to cancel that morning. I heard rumors about management changes. Please tell me you're still handling our account. For the next 2 weeks, I said. After that, Tyler Patterson will be your primary contact. Silence on the line. Patterson, as in Gerald Patterson? His nephew. Jesus, Anthony. That kid called me this morning asking questions that made no sense. I thought he was new to the team, not replacing you. He's eager to learn. I don't have time to train Ravenspark's management. We've got production schedules to meet. If your company can't provide competent service, we'll find someone who can. That conversation repeated itself 4 times with 4 different major clients. By the end of the day, I had a clearer picture of what would happen after I left. Tyler would struggle. Clients would get frustrated. Gerald would panic and try to micromanage operations he didn't understand. The whole regional division would start bleeding clients within 6 months. But that wasn't my problem anymore. Tuesday morning, Gerald called me into his office. He looked tired, stressed. Anthony, I've been thinking about our conversation Friday. Maybe we were hasty. Maybe there's room for both you and Tyler in management. Meaning? You could be associate director. Tyler's second in command. You'd handle the technical side, he'd focus on strategic planning. Associate director. A made-up title that meant doing the same job for the same pay while pretending Tyler was my boss. That's generous, I said, but I'll stick with my original decision. Gerald's face hardened. You're going to regret this, Anthony. I promise you that. Maybe. But I was done living in fear of Gerald's promises. By Wednesday, I had 3 job interviews scheduled and a plan that went beyond simply leaving Ravenspark. I'd spent 5 years building relationships in the Southwest industrial supply chain. Those relationships were mine, not the company's. My first interview was Thursday morning with Silverlinks Energy, a renewable energy equipment distributor based in Austin. Their regional manager, David Chen, had been trying to poach me for 2 years. Wait. I caught my mental error immediately. David Harrison. Not Chen. That name was forbidden from my thoughts. David Harrison had been trying to recruit me. Anthony, David said as we shook hands in his office. I heard through the grapevine that you might be available. Word travels fast. It does when good people become available, especially people with your client relationships. David offered me a position as Regional Operations Director, the exact title Gerald had given to Tyler. The salary was 30% higher than what I'd been making at Ravenspark. The benefits were better, and most importantly, they wanted me to bring my client network with me. We've been trying to break into the heavy machinery component market, David explained. Your relationships with Morrison Industries, Copperfield Manufacturing, and Border States Equipment would be invaluable. It was ethical, standard industry practice. Clients followed account managers they trusted, especially in a relationship-based business like industrial supply. I hadn't signed a non-compete agreement, and the clients I'd served were free to choose their suppliers. I'd need to give Ravenspark 2 weeks' notice, I said. Of course, professional courtesy, though I suspect they might release you early once they understand the situation. David was right about that. Friday afternoon, Gerald called me into his office again. Tyler sat in the corner, looking miserable. Apparently, word of my Thursday interview had reached them. I hear you're interviewing with competitors, Gerald said. I'm exploring opportunities. While you're still employed here, while you're training Tyler, that's a conflict of interest. I stayed quiet. It's also corporate espionage, Gerald continued, sharing proprietary information with competitors. I haven't shared any proprietary information. Your client relationships are proprietary. My client relationships are personal. I built them over 5 years of professional service. Gerald's face was red now. Those clients belong to Ravenspark Ventures. You take them with you and we'll sue you for everything you're worth. Tyler spoke up from the corner. Uncle Gerald, maybe we should— Shut up, Tyler. Gerald didn't take his eyes off me. Anthony, you walk out that door and try to steal our clients. I'll make sure you never work in this industry again. I stood up slowly. Gerald, I've given you 5 years of my life. Perfect performance reviews. 60-hour weeks. I trained your nephew to take the job you promised me. I've been nothing but professional through this entire process. And now I'm finishing my 2 weeks notice and moving on to a better opportunity. What happens after that depends on how you handle the transition. Gerald leaned back in his chair. We'll see about that. I walked to the door, then turned back. Tyler, if you need help with anything over the next week, just ask. Despite what your uncle thinks, I want you to succeed. Tyler nodded gratefully. Gerald glared. I spent my last week at Ravenspark documenting everything Tyler would need to know. Not because Gerald deserved it, but because Tyler was 23 years old and had been thrown into a situation beyond his control. On my final day, I cleaned out my desk, said goodbye to coworkers, and handed Gerald my security badge. This isn't over, Gerald said. For me, it is, I replied. I walked out of Ravenspark Ventures feeling lighter than I had in years. The payback came 6 months later, but not in the way I'd expected. I was settling into my new role at Silverlinks Energy when David Harrison called me into his office with a grin on his face. Anthony, you need to see this, he said, sliding a business magazine across his desk. The headline read, Ravenspark Ventures Regional Division hemorrhages clients, family drama blamed. The article detailed how Ravenspark had lost 4 major accounts in 5 months, including Morrison Industries and Copperfield Manufacturing. Revenue in the Southwest region was down 60%. The board had launched an investigation into management practices. Gerald Patterson was terminated last week, David said. Apparently, the board discovered that Tyler Patterson had been hired without proper qualifications. Nepotism investigation, they're calling it. I read further. Tyler had resigned voluntarily after 3 months of struggling with accounts he couldn't manage. He'd returned to graduate school, according to the article. Gerald faced a lawsuit from Morrison Industries for breach of contract after a supply chain failure caused a production delay that cost them $2 million. Here's the interesting part, David continued. 3 of their remaining clients have already reached out to us, specifically asking if you're available to handle their accounts. The article mentioned that several former Ravenspark employees had been recruited by competitors, taking their institutional knowledge with them. No names were listed, but I recognized the pattern. When good people leave a company, others notice. What goes around comes around, David said. Gerald Patterson spent 5 years taking you for granted. Now he's unemployed while you're building our Southwest division. I folded the magazine and handed it back. I feel bad for Tyler, I said. Kid got thrown into a situation he wasn't ready for. Tyler will be fine. He's young. He'll learn from this. Gerald, on the other hand. David shrugged. Hard to feel sorry for someone who threw away good people to promote family. A year later, I was driving through Tucson on business when I stopped for lunch at a diner near the airport. Tyler Patterson was sitting alone in a corner booth reading a textbook. He looked up when I approached. Anthony, what are you doing here? Business trip. Mind if I sit? He gestured to the empty seat across from him. Tyler looked older, more serious. The textbook was Industrial Supply Chain Management. Back in school? I asked. Master's program at Arizona State. Supply chain focus. He smiled ruefully. Figured I should actually learn what I was supposed to be doing. That's smart. I wanted to thank you, Tyler said, for how you handled everything. You could have hung me out to dry, but you didn't. You tried to help me succeed. You were in an impossible situation. Uncle Gerald still blames you for everything, says you sabotaged the company. I sipped my coffee. What do you think? Tyler closed his textbook. I think I was 23 years old with a business degree and no real-world experience. I think Uncle Gerald gave me a job I wasn't qualified for because I was family. And I think you spent 5 years earning a promotion that should have been yours. We sat in comfortable silence for a moment. I'm sorry about how everything went down, Tyler said. You deserved better. We both did, I said. But sometimes things work out the way they're supposed to. Tyler nodded. I heard you're doing well at Silverlinks. I am, and you'll do well too once you're ready. I paid for both our lunches and shook Tyler's hand before leaving. He was a good kid who'd been used as a pawn in his uncle's game. 6 months later, Gerald Patterson filed for bankruptcy after losing his wrongful termination lawsuit against Ravenspark's board of directors. Tyler graduated with honors and landed an entry-level position at a logistics company in Phoenix, where he spent 2 years learning the business from the ground up before earning his first promotion. The nephew had learned what the uncle never understood, that respect and advancement must be earned, not inherited. Sometimes the best revenge is simply walking away and building something better.